Welcome back to Fighting Words. I'm Chris Maxwell, joined as always by Andreas Hale. But we have a guest today, and that is multimedia producer and reporter for MMAfighting.com, Mike Heck. Mike, thank you so much for joining the show. It's good to be back. I've been gone for the past couple of weeks, but I am excited to talk to you guys about UFC 294 that is happening this Saturday, October 21st in Abu Dhabi on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. So the original card for this fight, it was pretty good to begin with. The co-main event was supposed to be Paulo Costa versus Khamzat Chimaev, and the main card was supposed to be Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. And now the new main event for UFC 294 is, of course, Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski for a highly anticipated rematch, and with the co-main event being Kamaru Usman, who's actually jumping up in weight class to fight Khamzat Chimaev. So this is actually a pretty exciting pay-per-view card for the UFC. Do you think these changes actually make the fight better?
I think now, in my opinion, this is a better card. I'm looking forward to UFC 294 more than I was before, because I think the main and co-main have a lot more intrigue, and the stakes are even higher for every single combatant on this card. So I'm all in. I'm all in on UFC 294. I think a lot of times in combat sports, when things happen that we cannot predict and cards get shuffled, we end up getting better cards. And I think this is one of those cases where I am happy. I'm not happy that Charles Oliveira got hurt. I'm not happy that Paulo Costa had that elbow surgery. But I am happy with the cards that we got now, because I'm very intrigued in this co-main and this main event. What do you think, Mike?
This is a weird one, because this is probably the question I've been asked the most since all the changes are made. And the answer I keep landing on, is it better or not? No. But that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's not better, but it's not worse. So this is a big win for the UFC, because how many times do we lose a main event, Andreas, or a co-main event, or one of these fighters fall out and are replaced by random contender series fighter who got lamped in 64 seconds, stepping in on short notice as a plus 17,000 underdog in a fight he has no chance of winning? Or remember when we lost Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira 2 in December? The fight of the freaking year. We're going to get a rematch, and instead we get Jan Blachowicz and Magomed Ankalaev taking a stroll in the park, and we got a Paddy Pimblett co-main event on the year-end pay-per-view. That's not what's happening here. We get a rematch of the fight of the year so far, at least in my opinion, which to me is more compelling than the rematch we would have got with Charles Oliveira. But the co-main event, I have to say, Andreas, you may not agree with me, I was more intrigued by Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa, only because I want to see Chimaev fight a top-ranked middleweight who, like him, is a big, athletic, physical middleweight. Usman, probably the second best welterweight of all time, top 3 at worst. Interesting matchup. One I wanted to see 2 years ago for the welterweight title. We get it now with Chimaev stepping back in the octagon, entering his physical prime. Usman probably doesn't have his fastball anymore, but he could certainly be competitive. But the thing I like the most about this fight, we got the Vince Russo swerve, bro. I didn't see this coming from a mile away. So I like that aspect. But there is a part of me that wanted Chimaev Costa just to see how he could handle a top 5 physical middleweight. But look, I ain't complaining about this fight.
I will say this, Mike. I'm more intrigued by Usman stepping in, because Usman's called out for a fight with Chimaev on numerous occasions. Whether he deserves it or not is up in the air. I think a lot of us assume that Costa was going to get nerfed by Chimaev. I think a lot of us assume that most people are going to get nerfed by Chimaev. But I think there's so much on the line, and I know that we're going to talk about this in a minute, with Kamaru Usman's legacy and him jumping up in weight. He's a maniac for doing this. Volkanovski makes sense. I feel like Volkanovski was like, thank God you guys called me. Makhachev's going to fight his fight. I know what I need to do in this rematch. I had so much momentum. I'm good with taking this fight on 10 days notice. Usman is a maniac for taking this fight on 10 days notice. It almost feels desperate, because he's trying to get his name back out there. Getting beat by Leon Edwards twice doesn't help. So I'm more intrigued by Usman taking a desperation Hail Mary toss for this fight than only a maniac would do. Whereas Costa, I just felt like Chimaev was going to beat him up.
I don't think it's desperation, though. I think this is brilliant by Kamaru Usman. I think this is absolutely smart. This is what he should have done. When we found out Chimaev and this fight was in jeopardy, if I'm Kamaru Usman and his team, I'm immediately on the phone with the UFC saying, get me in here. Because what's the worst thing that can happen for Kamaru Usman? He goes out there and just gets ragdolled by Khamzat Chimaev. He, at least to me, and I'm sure I'll talk about the other thing, has the built-in excuse. Like, look, I just fought this monster up a weight class on 10 days notice when I had nothing going on. They were going to maybe throw me in there with Bilal Muhammad. And this is like the complete opposite of Bilal Muhammad. This is just an absolute wrecking ball. But if he wins, he gets a freaking middleweight title shot. And if you asked me in January if Kamaru Usman was going to be a middleweight title contender, I would have laughed in your face. And if you told me that he might be fighting Sean Strickland for the middleweight title in 2024, I would have been like, you need to get drug tested, son. So I get where you're coming from. I am still intrigued by the matchup. We could have done far worse than this. Hamzat had to fight on this card. But the fact we're getting Usman on here on short notice in a fight that I think is actually going to be really, really fun, because I think the best chance for Usman to win this fight is to just go after Hamzat and force him into a war, which means someone's going to sleep. This is going to end inside of 2 rounds, in my opinion. So I am excited for that. I get it, but I don't think it's desperation. I think this is brilliance by Kamaru Usman.
So when we look at these 4 fighters in the main and co-main event, who do you think has the most to gain and the most to lose now because of these changes?
The most to gain is Alexander Volkanovski. Obviously, if you win the lightweight championship after being this stellar featherweight and you beat the guy that is the champion that you were coming on strong in the fight late, your legacy is taking a mighty leap. Like, if Islam wins again, it is what it is. If Volk wins, we got to have a new conversation about his place in history. So I think it's him. The most to lose, and we just talked about, I think, is Kamaru Usman. Mike, to your point, I think it's brilliant that he's taking this fight. But I think a lot of people, if he loses 3 fights in a row, Kamaru Usman losing 3 fights in a row, the man who we were once calling one of the greatest welterweights of all time almost becomes a has-been to a lot of people. Chimaev, if he loses, maybe he's just not the hype that we thought he was. If Volkan is Islam, however that fight plays out, there's a rubber match maybe. But I think if Usman loses, it's a wrap. Unfortunately, it's not fair, but the MMA world's not fair, and a lot of people don't care if you take fights on short notice. If you get nerfed, you get nerfed. I think Usman has everything on the line, and he also might have the most to gain because, as we just talked about, with that middleweight title opportunity, but I feel like Volk's ceiling's so much higher because it's not just winning the lightweight championship. It is becoming not even Hall of Fame, but we're talking like all-time great status if he does this. But Usman has the most to lose, and Volk has the most to gain, in my opinion.
Krista, you're going to be happy to know that I disagree with Andreas here. I think Kamaru Usman is unequivocally the answer for the most to gain in this fight. Because, see, here's the deal. Alexander Volkanovski, in most people's eyes, even though he clearly lost in my eyes to Islam Makhachev in February, 3 rounds, you can argue even Islam won 4 rounds if you actually go back and closely watch that fight. The fact that Volk is in here and is still, in most people's eyes, the pound-for-pound king, despite losing to Islam Makhachev, just tells you the way that not only does the UFC view him, but just the MMA community in general. So the fact that he is stepping in on 10 days notice and everyone's like, oh my God, this guy is so brave and so strong. What a gangster. But Islam Makhachev is just this dude who's like, okay, guess he's fighting a featherweight, gets no credit for this whatsoever. So to me, Volkanovski is playing with as much house money as you could possibly have. Now, this could be his last chance to beat Islam Makhachev, and I understand that because, honestly, I think Makhachev is going to eventually go to 170 in case his boy Usman Nurmagomedov wants to make the leap over to the UFC. He can go up to 170. He can let his friend and teammate hop in there, maybe become the lightweight champion. I think Islam's future at lightweight is not going to be for much longer. Now, for Usman, if he wins this fight, he's going to fight Sean Strickland for the middleweight title. And no disrespect to you, Sean Strickland, because what you did this year is amazing. Kamaru Usman is going to be the middleweight champion of the world if he wins this fight. He is going to beat Sean Strickland, more than likely, because you know what? He's already done it, Andreas. He's already beat the man. So it's Kamaru Usman unequivocally for me. Most to lose, it's Islam Makhachev. And it's not fair. It's not fair, Andreas. He's getting no credit for taking this fight. If he wins, it's going to be, well, you just beat the featherweight coming off the couch on 10 days notice. And if he loses, it's, oh, you suck anyways. Volkanovski's the man. He is in a no-win situation here, so he has to win this fight. So to me, Usman has the most to gain. Makhachev has the most to lose. And I hate the fact that Makhachev has the most to lose.
Wait, I got to say one thing. This UFC year has been weird. The last 12 months, we've had, I believe, 13 title changes. Look, as much as I like to believe that if Kamaru Usman beats Chimaev, that he kind of automatically becomes a middleweight champion, this year has been strange. Sean Strickland might beat Kamaru Usman. I don't know what the hell's going on anymore. Dude, Israel Adesanya wasn't supposed to lose to Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland ain't supposed to be here. There's no automatics in the UFC anymore. Like, I was feeling the same way. If Usman beats Chimaev, yeah, he's kind of the middleweight champion. But I just seen Sean Strickland beat Izzy at his own game for 5 rounds. I don't know what the hell's going on. The UFC's goofy.
Dude, I'm preparing to live in a world where Mateusz Gamrot is going to fight Islam Makhachev for the lightweight title because we don't know. He's still the backup fighter. He might still get the tag in. We don't even know at this point. So there's like 20% of me that is preparing for Gamrot to step in and fight for the title on Saturday.
Oh, and one other thing. Remember the last time we had a major shakeup? Who was involved in that card, Mike?
There was many people.
I'm talking about one of the biggest shakeups in UFC pay-per-view history. 24 hours notice? Yes.
Good old Hamzat.
He's here again. Can the man make weight?
He'll make weight. He'll make weight. Thank God this isn't a welterweight fight.
Oh, my goodness. What a disaster that was. Yeah, hopefully. But who knows? Anything can happen. I'm here for the smoke. Whatever happens, happens. I'm just happy there's a good main and a co-main event with great stakes, and it's early enough in the West Coast so I can do other things with my night.
Yeah, we all win with early day MMA.
Unless you're a college football fan, it makes things a little difficult. But Andreas, you kind of already mentioned this, that if Volkanovski does pull off the upset, if he does revenge his only loss on Saturday, it does put him in the conversation to be an all-time great in the UFC. But there is one thing that is also working against him, aside coming off of injury, and that is his age. We like to talk about age in the combat world because I know for the three of us, 35 doesn't seem that old, but when we're talking about being in the octagon, it's pretty old, right? His opponent is 31. So for Volkanovski, if he were to win, not only would he then hold 2 belts in the UFC, but he would be the oldest fighter below middleweight to hold that title. And for fighters of 35 in age, there's, I think the record is 2-21 in the UFC for winners, and that's Tyron Woodley for both of those wins. So when we look at the trajectory forward for Alexander Volkanovski, if he were to win this, how much longer does he have in his career? How much more fuel is in the tank to continue this run of dominance, even though he, as you said, probably already secured his place as an all-time great in the UFC?
That's a good question because, yeah, to your point, like lighter weights are not generous to the older man. Like they just don't fight well in smaller weight classes. And if Volkanovski were to pull this off, I think, again, he's in rarefied air. I don't know how much longer he fights. The guy's a maniac. He'll fight anybody. He's tremendous. He's still improving, which is the crazy thing. Every time I watch this man fight, I'm seeing things that he's doing even better. His footwork gets better. His control of distance. Obviously, he's always been a solid wrestler, but everything gets better with him. I don't think there's really an expiration date as of right now in Volkanovski's career. And the mouth-watering matchups at lightweight for him, Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, that sounds ridiculous. Like we're looking at a man who could potentially be John Jones, the greatest fighter of all time. I don't care what anybody says, regardless of what he does outside the octagon. If this man steamrolls Stipe, forget about it. But Volk is getting very close to being in that conversation. Granted, the problem is he's still in the midst of his career. Losses could change everything. But I think as of right now, if he were to beat Islam Makhachev and then he defends that title maybe 1 or 2 times and rides off into the sunset, it becomes a really interesting conversation about his place. Furthermore, it even elevates Max Holloway's stock even more because Max ran roughshod over the featherweights and there's only one man he couldn't beat. He becomes the Joe Frazier to Alexander Volkanovski's Muhammad Ali. Granted, Joe Frazier beat Ali once, but you get what I'm saying. He couldn't beat him. Like in terms of boxing history, that's where they are, but they are very close to each other. Max Holloway gets elevated with every Alexander Volkanovski win. All of this is intriguing to me.
Can I just say that the GOAT conversation in MMA is just the worst. It's something that it's just because it's so objective and you can look at it however you want. And you could make a clear case because best and great are not the same thing. You know what I mean? Talent and greatness are not the same thing. You feel like it might be the same thing, but it isn't. Like John Jones, to me, is the best and is the greatest fighter because he checks off all the boxes. You got to have a little more pizzazz than just wins and losses. And while Volk is picking up some of those things and getting more interesting along the way, talent-wise, he might be the best fighter of this generation. He just might be talent-wise. He's got it all. He's one of the smartest fighters in the world when it comes to fight IQ and in-cage adjustments. Just go look at the second Max Holloway fight. It is a brilliant work of art. How Volkanovski in round 3 just turned the tide, wins 3, 4, and 5, and wins the fight after getting dropped by Max Holloway. It looked like he was on his way to losing a convincing decision, and he finds a way to win. And since then, it's just gotten better and better and better and better. I don't think he's in the top 5 conversation yet. I'll play the game. If he beats Islam Makhachev, he ain't better than John Jones. He ain't better than DJ. He ain't better than Anderson Silva. But he's on the Mount Rushmore. He's number 4 in my eyes if he goes out and wins this fight. Because as cool as it is that he wins 2 titles, I don't care about 2 titles. I would rather see a guy go to his division and just win continuous title defenses. There's nothing more cool in MMA than someone running off 10 or more title defenses in your own division. That is not cleaning. What Volk has done has been impressive. Has he cleaned out the featherweight division? A lot of people tell me that he has. He has not cleaned out the featherweight division, and he's nowhere near clearing out the featherweight division with all these guys coming up. He has not beat Ilia Topuria yet. He's not beat Movsar Evloev yet. He has not beat a lot of these guys in this division yet. I hope if Volkanovski wins this fight, the first things he says after thanking the Lord above and his family is that I'm vacating the featherweight title, I'm keeping the lightweight title, and I'm going to fight, like you said, Andreas, the Justin Gaethjes and the Dustin Poiriers and the Arman Sarukians and the Grant Dawsons and the Jalen Turners and all these guys, the Mateusz Gamrots and all these guys coming up right now. This is what I want to see for Volkanovski. I have zero interest in seeing Volkanovski Max Holloway 4. I have more interest in getting 14 canker sores in my mouth than watching that fight right now. And sorry, that's kind of like the best case scenario here. So if Volk wins, he's top 4, but he ain't 1, 2, or 3.
All right. Well, as you both said, it has been a crazy year for the UFC. There's been a lot of shakeups. So I know my next question isn't going to mean much, and I'm not going to hold you guys accountable for what you're about to say. But if we're looking at predictions for the main and co-main event for UFC 294, who do you got?
Co-main event, I got to go with Chimaev. Look, I loved Kamaru Usman as welterweight champion. I thought he was one of the most active, talented, much improved fighters that we saw from The Ultimate Fighter. I thought he was incredible, but I think he's biting off more than he can chew. It's not just because Kamaru is Kamaru. It's because Chimaev is Chimaev, and Chimaev is nuts. He's strength, power, grappling. Like, he's got a little bit of everything, and he's got that nastiness factor in him. I think he's going to finish Kamaru within 2 rounds. I think it might get ugly quick. If Kamaru can't establish himself, I know he's got a decent jab, but he loves his hands a little bit too much. Chimaev by knockout, 2nd round knockout over Usman. Main event, I'm going to go with Volk. I think the momentum's on his side. I think Islam is who Islam is. I think Volk has figured things out from that first fight that he's going to apply in the second fight. And it's very rare that you have a rematch where somebody kind of coming off the couch has an advantage. But I think Volk he just continues to improve. I think Volk wins this fight by decision, 3 rounds to 2. I think it'll be entertaining early, and I think Volk will run away with it late. So I think we'll have a new lightweight champion in Alexander Volkanovski.
My big question in the co-main event is can Kamaru Usman stay off his back? If he gets taken down, he's going to get killed by Khamzat Chimaev. We saw what Leon Edwards did. Usman couldn't get up. If Chimaev gets him down there, he is going to obliterate Kamaru Usman. So if Usman can stay on his feet and turn this into a slugfest, I think he's got a chance to win this fight. But you kind of go to your bread and butter in situations like this. When you get desperate, you go back to what's gotten you to the dance. And unfortunately, it ain't going to work against Khamzat Chimaev. Chimaev's going to eventually pick Usman up. He might even talk to Dana White while he's doing it. He's going to carry him across the cage. He's going to put him on his back, and he's going to obliterate him. So give me Khamzat Chimaev, late round 1 stoppage. But I do think, to Usman's credit, he's going to go in there. He's going to be game. He's going to try everything in his power to knock out Khamzat Chimaev. That man's just going to get your hands on you. And then once he does, he's going to hoist that man in the air and obliterate him. So give me Chimaev, but Usman, I don't think he's going to lose a ton of stock here. He's going to be in the Dana White favorite zone. And if Colby Covington wins the welterweight title and calls out Kamaru Usman, because he took this fight, is still in play for the welterweight title, which is insane to say, even after he gets obliterated by Khamzat Chimaev. As far as the main event goes, I just think Islam Makhachev's going to do it. I think he's got to get it done. two of the best fight IQs in MMA right now, two of the best coached fighters in all of MMA right now. It is going to be a really interesting fight. It's going to be far more competitive than the Oliveira rematch was going to be, but I think Islam's just going to be a little bit too much. I think Volk's going to have his moments down the stretch, but in the end, I think Islam Makhachev is going to learn a little bit more from the loss for the win against Volkanovski than Volk learned in the loss. And I know Volk's probably been obsessed with that loss ever since February, but Islam's just so good, man. He's so good. And I just don't know if Volk's got enough in the tank to be able to win this fight. So give me Makhachev, but it's going to be fun as hell.
Well, we'll have to find out this Saturday, UFC 294, streaming on ESPN Plus pay-per-view. The event is in Abu Dhabi, which means it will be on 2 p.m. Eastern time. So I will be switching back and forth between the Penn State-Ohio State game to watch. Hopefully it is as good as you guys predict. And we will be back next week. The whole gang will be back together. We'll have Tom back, along with myself and Andreas. And of course, we'll be talking about Tyson Fury and Francis Ngannou and that fight, that boxing MMA crossover fight that's happening. But Mike, thank you so much for joining Fighting Words. We hope to have you back. And until then, we will see you next week on Fighting Words. Like, subscribe, comment, all those things. We'll be back to boxing next week. See you then.